What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Trust Your Board podcast. My name is Stephen Wright, joined by Mr. William Monroe. Will, how you doing?
Steve, I'm doing well. We just got past the trade deadline here on Tuesday, the 2nd of November. Nothing really major, fantasy-wise at least. I know yesterday we had Bradley Chubb's running mate, Von Miller, traded. But other than that, really wasn't anything super major.
No, I don't think so. I think Deshaun Jackson was let go.
Yes.
I don't know if you consider that fantasy relevant or not, but I kind of, I guess.
Yeah, maybe Van Jefferson.
Yeah, maybe he gets a bump.
More targets. Or Tutu Atwell, if he's available in Dynasty, maybe.
Yeah. And then on the other side, I'm like, D-Jack still has something, but I guess we have to see where he lands. Bigger news probably being the Henry Ruggs news. So, I'll have to see how that unfolds. I know in our league, I don't know if you saw, he's been dropped already. Recording this on a Tuesday.
Yeah, I saw that was during the day today, actually. Yeah. And in our Dynasty League, he was offered to us, and minutes later was traded for a 5th-round pick. I don't know if you saw it actually went through.
Yeah, I did see that. So there'll be plenty of action there. Again,
people interested in buying, people wanting to get out now.
Yeah, you play that game in Dynasty as to what you want to do. As far as redraft is concerned, he was fantasy relevant to a degree. He kind of had that D-Jax role, right? We had some big weeks and then some, kind of meh kind of weeks. So, I guess people were using him for them, but it's not like you lost a weekly starter, I would imagine. If so, you're probably in bad shape. But, not the end of the world for most redrafters there. But you ready to jump into some start-sit questions here?
Yeah, one quick note there. Just brought up Tutu Atwell. Didn't realize, actually, yesterday he was put on the IR and done for the season with a shoulder injury. So,
I didn't hear that either.
Not much of a bump there, yeah. I mean, he hasn't been doing too much, but it kind of would have made sense that, him being ready would have been why they moved on from Deshaun. But I guess not, and maybe that gives even more of a boost. I don't really know what else they have behind Van Jefferson for that, 4th, 5th option.
Yeah, and maybe it just, it just rises the guys that are there. Like, Woods doesn't get the targets he used to. Maybe you give more to Higbee or something like that. A little bit of running back. You sprinkle around to the guys and, no 4th option really emerges from the wide receiver core. Yeah. So, we'll see. You never know. The Rams offense is good enough to have somebody just kind of pop out too. So, we'll see.
This is very true. We will see, but alas, we have to get into some start-sit questions here today.
Yeah, and for the second week in a row, we're going to start it off with a kind of a gross one. Starting with the quarterback position here, Will. Trevor Siemian versus the Falcons, or new superstar White at Indy?
Don't love either. You probably, give it to Siemian for the matchup against Atlanta, but there's still a chance that you have Hill coming back from concussion protocol. I think Micah White is a little safer of an option and does play Thursday. So I know we don't love the Thursday games. They don't tend to be the best fantasy options, short week and all, but I think there's something to be said about, he's going to start and you'll know what you get out of him and you'll be able to plan the rest of your lineup accordingly. Whether you get a decent quarterback game, a low quarterback game, or even a higher quarterback game. So, as crazy as it is, I think I go Mike White here.
I think I'm in agreement, which is kind of funny because, we got another Jets-related question later, and I'm probably going to take the opposite stance. But I think I would go with him here, and it's around what you said with Siemian, and not sure if it's going to be Taysom or not. And even if it is, like, there's a scenario where Simeon's a starter and he's the quarterback, but Taysom comes in for a lot of like gadget stuff. And not that that's probably going to be a long-term thing, but maybe a way to ease Taysom back into it if they're going to do something like that, which is going to reduce Simeon's touchdown upside. I don't think that happens, but I think there's a world where it does happen. So yeah, that combined with the argument you laid out, I think White would be my guy too.
Yeah, I think it makes the most sense. On the flip side of that, as you mentioned, our next matchup, Carson Wentz versus the Jets, Derek Carr at New York Giants.
This one is difficult. They're both pretty consistent from a fantasy perspective. I think Carr tends to have a little bit more upside to him. But, you do have, Ruggs gone now. How's that change the offense? We look and say, earlier from a fantasy perspective, Ruggs wasn't doing a ton. He had some boom bust games, but from an NFL standpoint, he stretches the field. He is in a position to make safety stay deep at times. So maybe defenses play the Raiders a little bit differently, and that ends up hurting Carr. I think that's possible. But with that said, I think I'd still stick with Carr because, as I said at the start, I think he has better upside than Wentz does. Plus, as you said, Thursday night game, I don't tend to like those. I think both are good, but I think they both got similar floors, but Carr's got better upside. So I'll stick with him.
Yeah, I'm going to go Carr as well, especially given the note that Jets have been getting torched on the ground, and maybe this is a game where Mike White can score some points and and they can stay in the game. But typically, the game script for the Jets has been they're getting dominated early, and the passing game for the other team doesn't really need to kick into high gear. So I can imagine this being a pretty good Jonathan Taylor game, and I just think the Giants, they didn't look great on Monday Night Football last night, but look good enough that they're going to be able to compete with teams, and I think that's just going to be more motivation for Derek Carr and company coming off the bye. Probably have a really good game plan in place. So I would lean Carr here as well, but I think a little more definitively than yours.
And our last quarterback question here. This one's kind of interesting. Justin Fields at Pittsburgh or Jimmy Garoppolo versus the Cardinals?
Yeah, this is interesting. Obviously, both defenses have been playing well. Pittsburgh traditionally well. Cardinals a little more of this year playing well. Fields really, kind of came into his own, had some big moments in that game, but overall hasn't been great this year. Jimmy G has been probably a little more consistent, so I'd probably go with Garoppolo as more of like a consistency play. Tough matchup, but I think divisional game, they're gonna make some plays. Whereas Fields against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh, Monday Night Football, I think this is his first primetime game. I'm a little more concerned there. So maybe like pure upside just with the rushing. You could get something there, but I think I lean Jimmy G here in battle between two tough matchups.
Yeah, that's my lean as well. I know there's some hype, around Fields and his good week, but like you said, he's up against Pittsburgh now. That's a really good defense. It's a Monday night, and it's odd to say because if you talk about quarterbacks, Jimmy G is usually someone that does not have much of a floor, but Justin Fields has a worse floor, as we've seen many times this year. So I think from a floor play, it's Jimmy G, and then from an upside play, I think it's still probably Jimmy G. Fields has a lot of upside week over week because of the rushing ability, because you're waiting for that breakout to happen. But I really, against a Pittsburgh defense, I don't see that happening this week. Where Jimmy G traditionally doesn't have a ton of upside. This week was kind of weird, giving out 2 rushing touchdowns. I wouldn't expect that, but this is an important game. If the 49ers want to, make some sort of playoff push, they need to figure it out, and they need to win this game in the division against Arizona. So it could be a high scoring game. We'll have to see, what happens with Kyler. But it could be higher scoring. That could benefit Jimmy. So I will stick with Jimmy, both floor and upside.
All right. And next up, we have PPR going into the running backs here. Zach Moss at Jacksonville or Darrell Williams versus the Packers.
Yeah, so this one's tough because I think, to the best of my knowledge, I think CEH is still up in the air. I think he's eligible to return, but I don't think we have anything definitive. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I know that he's coming close to the time he's eligible to come back, but I don't know that we have any definitive word or knowledge on that yet.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't follow the IRs enough to know typically when they bring them off. Like if he's planning on playing this week, would they have brought him off today, or could they wait till Friday? Like I don't know any of that. He's definitely eligible. His 3 weeks have happened. So I guess monitor that. If CEH is playing, I'd probably just go with Moss. If he's not playing, I'll stick with Darrell Williams. He's been pretty good while CEH is out, and this looks to be a good game with the Packers here. I would like to think there'd be lots of points scored, but who knows with the Chiefs offense anymore. But, despite the offense struggling, Darrell's been good for fantasy, so I'll stick with him.
Yeah, I'm kind of there as well. I just, even with the great matchup for Zach Moss, I still don't trust either of the running backs there in Buffalo, playing in Jacksonville. I could, see this being another game where they just pass, and by the end they're running, but you don't have as much a chance for a touchdown as you'd like with a big offense like that. Where I think this is, almost like a worst case scenario where you have the young guy Derek Gore coming in and playing well for Kansas City. Did they phase out the veteran and Darrell Williams? And once again, he had 13 carries, only 49 yards, but 6 catches for 61 yards. Another great game in a game where he split the role. So, Clyde comes back. It probably muddies this a little more. You want just, guaranteed carries, you probably go with Moss. But I like, probably the volume and upside of Darrell Williams if Clyde isn't back in this one.
PPR, Elijah Mitchell versus the Cardinals or Michael Carter at Indy.
Yeah, this one is tough. Both guys playing really well right now. I think I gotta stay in the Flames with Carter, especially with a potential injury for Mitchell. He's going to be limited. They're going to need him, and he's been playing really well. So I don't think as long as he's healthy, I think you usually got to play him. But Michael Carter was all over the place. Mike White clearly thrown to the running back all the time. 14 targets, 9 catches for a running back, 95 yards, a touchdown, 15 carries for 77 yards. So he looked good on the ground as well. Tougher matchup for running back statistically. We'll get to Indianapolis, but I think you got to stay in the Flames with him here. Once again, there's Thursday night guys. You get an idea of what they are. At one, it's a good matchup. I'm going to play him and see what we get out of that. I think there's just a little more uncertainty with Mitchell. If this is a Sunday game and you can get to there and know, but with certainty, maybe you can go Mitchell. Better overall, offense probably, but I think with if this is your only 2 best options, I got to go Carter here.
See, I think, and you got to monitor the injury. Injury aside, I think I'm on the other side. Reason being, and again, you got to watch the injury. If this thing is dragging on with Mitchell, who doesn't practice all week, then my opinion's probably changing. From what I've seen, they're not super concerned about it, so I think he's going to be fine. But I do, the White versus Simeon is a little bit easier because I don't trust Simeon. It's more of a knock against Simeon than it is a bump for White. And that, to me, carries over a little bit into Carter. I'm suspect that just the reason the Jets offense was good is because there's no playbook on White. It just kind of caught everyone off guard. And now there is a playbook on him. People have seen him play. It's a short week, so he's not going to be able to prepare as much, and that could spell problems for Carter. On the flip side, it could just mean more dump-offs for him. That potential exists. But, if you're looking at that game and, most of what White is doing is dumping it off, you would think as a defense, you would kind of zone in on that and be like, no, we're not going to give you that easy stuff. You go make a throw.
Yeah, it's possible. The PPR, I think, really puts it over for me. 14 targets compared to 0 targets for Elijah Mitchell last week. And Mitchell has not been utilized in the passing game that much. He's got 4 catches on 4 targets on the year.
Yeah, that's definitely not how they're utilizing him for sure. I think I'll stick with him, though. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just hard to trust the Jets,
Yeah. But yeah, last running back, that half PPR, Joe Mixon versus the Browns or Henderson versus the Titans. I believe that's Sunday Night Football there.
Yeah, this, both of them have been really good. I think Henderson's probably been a bit more consistent with maybe a bit more upside to him. That's what it feels like. I'm not looking at their points, offhand, but that's kind of what it feels like. And I think he's got a better matchup against the Titans than Mixon does against the Browns. So I'll stick with Henderson here personally.
Yeah, it looks like Henderson, outside of week 7, has been top 20 in half-point scoring every week, and really, top 15 all but week 4 and week 7. So I think the consistency is just too much for them. And with Derrick Henry out, I anticipate this being a much better game script for the Rams. And you have a much better chance of Henderson working the second half with a lot of running. Mixon's not a bad play, especially with the Browns, still somewhat banged up. They're getting guys back, but I think there's, it's not out of the realm of possibility that the Browns go up early and Mixon still is utilized, but not as much, with needing to go downfield. So both great plays, but I will go with Henderson as well.
Perfect. Will, just say a little bit of information that I just saw. Maybe you saw before, but Washington is expecting Logan Thomas to return to practice next week.
Because they're on the bye this week, right? So
yeah, and they cut Jay Sternberger to start making room for him. So looks like that return's happening. I know people are streaming Ricky Seals-Jones for a couple weeks, but a little bit of an impact there.
Yeah, probably not going to be able to do that if Logan Thomas is healthy and active.
Probably not. But alas, moving on. We're moving into the wide receivers. This is a PPR. We're picking one to sit here, Will. Marvin Jones versus the Bills. Kadarius Toney versus the Raiders, or Jerry Judy at Dallas.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think they're all kind of in the same general vicinity. Judy last week, 4 catches on 4 targets, slowly working back in, but has a good game script matchup with Dallas. As long as they have Dak Prescott back, likely, needing to score points against that team. Kadarius Toney, I think there's some intrigue with the injury. Did he come back at the end of that game? I know he went out and came back, and I thought he went out again.
Yeah, I don't think he came back at the end of the game. Or no, he did. He did, I think. I don't think it was a ton, but I believe he did finish the game.
Mm-hmm. And 4 catches on 5 targets and limited action, obviously, only 26 yards. But he is a good option. I think you're just gambling with him. He seems like he's always kind of banged up, and maybe it's just a lingering injury that he's had that's got him in and out of the lineup. I'd probably lean sitting Toney here. I want to play Judy, because he looked good in what we saw, and I think they're just going to work him more and more back in. And Marvin Jones, just been fairly consistent, somewhat of a bad week this week, 5 for 35 on 7 targets, but the targets were still there. This is one that I imagine the game script is going to be in their favor. Anything can happen, but Buffalo should be able to go up early and often, and you imagine the targets are going to be there. It's just, can they execute on them? So I'm going to take Marvin and Judy.
Yeah, I'm coming to the same conclusion. Judy's the easiest one to lock in. I want that matchup against Dallas, where he could see a lot of usage, just in a potential shootout game with Dallas scoring a lot. And I don't trust either Marvin Jones or Toney. I know I kind of beat up on Marvin last week. So you're right in that Marvin got a lot of targets, and the game script should definitely be in his favor this week. On the flip side, the Bills, I believe, have the number 1 pass defense from a fantasy perspective in the league. So, maybe those targets don't really help him. Maybe all that cancels out and he just has a fine week. Maybe he just, he catches a touchdown and he's fine. I don't know. I don't trust him. But with that said, I trust Toney even less for everything you laid out. So I won't kind of rehash everything, but I will sit Toney, start Marvin and Judy.
All right. Next up, half PPR, sticking on the Toney train. Kadarius Toney or Julio Jones at the Rams.
This, man, I think I gotta go with Toney. I can spell a story for Julio where, the offense is different. There's no Henry anymore. AJB could be getting shadowed by Ramsey. That opens up Julio, but Julio's not had a big game all year. We're in week 9, and just to suddenly be calling your shot just seems like a ridiculous thing to do. So I see the path for Julio. I just cannot place my bet on him. So I'll go with Toney here.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's a path. I'm in the mindset that it'd be nice if the Tennessee Titans kind of change up their game plan a bit and look to pass the ball more. As long as you got a healthy Julio in there, he and AJ Brown, would make a great pairing for that passing game. But and they're still, if he plays, likely you're going to have, the shadow of Jalen Ramsey on AJ Brown. So does that open up more for Julio? There's a narrative to be written for that. But yeah, coming back off the injury, he's been a guy that has come back too early at times. I just can't play Julio here when a similar injury risk to Kadarius Toney. Right, he's been in and out of some matchups, but he's actually played. He's come back. And in this matchup here, I'm just not ready to play Julio yet, so I'm going to Kadarius as well.
Yeah, fair enough. And our last wide receiver, half-point PPR, Hunter Renfrow at the Giants or Devontae Parker versus the Texans.
And I do like Parker as a nice waiver claim this week. As we said, I think this episode, you have Waddle, who has played well, a little banged up, but definitely going to be out there. Outside of that, I mean, they don't really have that second receiver. You've got Albert Wilson's there, and then I'm blanking on
you got Waddle
Notre Dame
and
receiver. The guy, I don't think he's played it yet. Maybe he hasn't. From the Texans, Notre Dame receiver, Will Fuller.
Oh,
Fuller, yeah. Yeah, got him there, but he hasn't really been able to stay healthy and get on the field. So I like Parker a lot. Obviously, Renfrow is kind of that, Cole Beasley-esque guy that you just kind of throw in there and hope for some receptions, but you're not banking on a bunch of touchdowns. I think at this point would take the shot on Parker, unless you just need a solid floor, but are okay with limited ceiling. I kind of want to take the shot on Parker here against the Texans.
Yeah, even if your goal was floor against the Texans, I find it hard to believe Parker's floor isn't pretty high. Renfro's been really consistent. Like you said, his floor is pretty consistent. Like that's hard to pass up. But in this matchup, I can't give up the Parker upside, and I think his floor is probably pretty similar. So I will stick with Parker here.
All right, our last heads up here, we got the flex PPR. Elijah Mitchell versus the Cardinals, Emmanuel Sanders at Jacksonville, and Laviska Shenault versus the Bills.
This one's Mitchell pretty easily for me, barring the injury. He's the one that gets relied on the most out of the three, and he's the one I trust more out of the three. As we've seen from Sanders all year, he's capable of having a big game, but like Carolina last year, as we kind of bring it up every few weeks, all the options in Buffalo are not going to have big weeks every week. Like it just kind of cycles.
Yeah, we saw the dud last week just for a minute.
Exactly. So, he's kind of taken on a boom bust kind of role, which is fine. But Mitchell's more consistent, and, everything that we said about Marvin Jones applies to Shenault. But I just, if I'm going to trust, the 49ers offense in a potentially high scoring game, or the Jacksonville offense against one of the best defenses in the league, I'm going to go San Fran. So I will stick with Mitchell here.
Yeah, I'm in on Mitchell as well. I mean, I like Emmanuel as an upside option, but I think the floor is there for just overall rushing volume. You're not going to get the targets. You don't get the extra points for passes. But yeah, I mean, Carter had that crazy target volume, and I think that's why I had to take him over Mitchell. This flex option, I think you got to go Mitchell, barring an injury, barring him being out. I like Sanders probably second here, but it's got to be Mitchell in this matchup here.
Okay, so we're going to move over to some trade questions here, Will, starting with a couple dynasty ones. Half-point PPR, Superflex, Kareem Hunt and Eli Mitchell, or a 23 second and Chase Claypool.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think this probably is, do you need a running back here, or are you looking to cash out on running back? Because you have, Kareem Hunt, who ideally comes back this year, but should have some value for the next few years, and Elijah Mitchell, a young running back, looks like have a spot the rest of this year. There is still just that uncertainty of Kyle Shanahan's offenses going forward with running backs. Trey Sermon looking over his shoulder for the rest of their rookie contracts. and the Mostert's still there. So I think, I'd say this year I kind of like the Hunt Mitchell side because you're getting running backs as long as Hunt comes back. More longer term, I do like the 23 draft class, so that second round pick is really appealing. And then Chase Claypool, he's been good, but especially when Juju's out the rest of this year, and I imagine he's gone next year. We'll see, do they get a new quarterback? So Claypool looks to be clearing away the number 2 there. Probably lean Hunt and Mitchell from a contender, and then anything in the middle or lower, I'll take pick in Claypool, I think.
Yeah, I am agreeing with you. I'm probably more strongly on the Hunt Mitchell side, even if I'm a rebuild, just because they're running backs and their value's up. You're also selling Hunt when he's hurt, and that's probably at a low point. I do have some concerns on both sides. Like you said, Mitchell's the guy now. Is he the guy next year? Is he the guy 2 years from now? San Francisco cycles through running backs like crazy. So, you really don't know. And then you mentioned Claypool. Is Juju back next year? Probably not. Devontae Johnson's going to be there though. You have a tight end in Freiermuth that's looking good and could be developing here, and you don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be. You're also not sure where that second's going to land. If that second ends up being a late second, that changes the equation a little bit. So I will stick with the running backs here in I think all situations, but it's pretty close when you're a rebuild.
All right. Next up, we have a Dynasty 12-team Superflex. Amari Cooper, James Robinson, and Boston Scott, or Derrick Henry and Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I would imagine it's a rebuilding team that's adding Henry and Ridley. It seems like a silly thing to do if you're a contender. All in all, I think it's fair. I would lean on having Henry and Ridley. I said that hesitantly. I mean, Henry is getting a little bit older, and an injury is not great for a running back. So, he could start falling off. We just don't know what's happening with Ridley. If he ended up retiring and stepping away, I don't think that would really surprise everyone. With that said, maybe he's back in 3 weeks and he's fine. You just don't know. But at the same time, Boston Scott has value for a couple weeks and then none again. And James Robinson's looked good this year so far, but don't forget they drafted ETN and he'll be back next year. And what's James Robinson's role going to be next year? We don't know. I have no complaints about Amari Cooper. So there's question marks on both sides. I will take the question marks with the guys with the higher upside in Henry and Ridley.
This one's interesting because I think the Cooper, Robinson, Scott side, if you're a contender and you're just trying to, push all in, makes sense. Take that side. If you're like a true rebuild, though, I don't know that you want the Henry Ridley side because there is a lot of uncertainty there, right? You have Henry's foot, which, hopefully gets healed up and he can come back next year, but running back, foot injury, he's probably getting close to the age where that's pretty worrisome. And like you said, Ridley, could bounce back, come back in a few weeks. Ridley could step away from the game for a while. So I think the only way I take like that side is if I'm like rebuilding unexpectedly and just have like a bunch of injured guys and I'm expecting to like bounce back and compete next year, not like a full rebuild. Like maybe you have had, Dobbins and Cam Akers and you took, a hit early on and you're banking on them guys coming back next year, but this year you're a little uncertain about it. So I think I lean the Cooper side unless like it's a situation where you're trying to rebuild, if rebuild in just this year and bounce right back. Because I think, if you're rebuilding, I think you can, it's not perfect to grab Cooper and Robinson, but are they more marketable than Henry and Ridley to some teams? I don't know. It's tough. So I think in a vacuum, I almost lean the Cooper Robinson side here. I think you got to be in a pretty specific scenario unless your team league is very active and you think you could flip Henry and Ridley pretty quickly if needed.
Yeah, fair enough. Our next one, redraft. We got a straight up here. Well, PPR, Jerry Judy or Michael Pittman.
Yeah, this one, think it's fairly easy. Pittman has just looked so good, and he's finally getting the volume. I like Judy coming off the injury. There's other weapons there. I think he's going to be good this year. You're going to be able to flex him, but I think Pittman is at this point as close to a weekly start as you can get, and he just kind of has had that look of an alpha receiver. So I think fairly easy Pittman for me.
Yeah, if this was Dynasty, it would be probably a different answer.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm with you. Like Pittman just doesn't have that many options to compete with. Where Jerry Judy's got plenty of good options. I think Jerry Judy's probably. I think he's a better player, but he's just dealing with Sutton and Fan and two running backs, and there's just a lot going on there. Pittman just doesn't have that same competition, and he's been pretty consistent all year long. I do think there's just this general uneasiness about Indy. Because you look at Wentz make a stupid mistake every week, and they're just not performing at the level they thought they would get, and everyone thought they would get. So I think that makes people uneasy about Pittman. But then you look at the box scores here, and he's good week in and week out. So he's really hard to pass up on. I'll go with Pittman too.
All right, and next up here, redraft PPR with 4 keepers. It's an interesting one. Antonio Gibson, DeAndre Hopkins, Darrell Henderson, and a 22 sixth round pick. Or Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Swift, and the 22 first round pick.
Yeah, we don't get a ton of keeper questions. I think to start, if you're a contender, I think it's the Gibson side for me. Just because you're getting 3 usable assets, even if Gibson's a little banged up, you're getting 3 usable assets there to help you with that. Now, if you're not really contending and you're looking more towards next year and you got other keepers, it gets tougher because I'm not sure what Henderson's value is going to be next year. He could be a guy that he's earned the role. It's his role, and he's good. He could end up in a 50-50 timeshare with Akers when he gets back, assuming he comes back to full health and he's Cam Akers. He could completely lose the job to Cam Akers because clearly they liked Akers to begin with over Henderson. So I don't know what to do about him, and that gives me some worry moving forward. Meanwhile, Kupp, he's still going to have Stafford. He'll be great. DeAndre Swift, I'm assuming he's going to be better next year. I would, not that he's been bad this year, but I think the Lions as a whole almost have to be better to some degree next year. And then the first is nice to have. So it does depend, when it comes to keepers, it's nice to see the entire team so you can kind of make a decision because we don't know who the other keepers could potentially be. But I think as a contender, I would take Gibson as a rebuild or not rebuild, but looking ahead to next year, I would take the Kupp side. What about you?
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I think kind of the way I look at it, I think Kupp over Hopkins. It's close, but Kupp has been playing lights out. He's been you just can't pass on him. Swift and Henderson is close, but I think you could argue Swift. And obviously, the first round pick is better than the 6th round pick. So I think is that all worth Antonio Gibson? I guess is what it comes down to. Can you take that pick and turn it around and get another player? I think I lean the Kupp Swift side, especially with the uncertainty of Henderson going forward, and maybe you can say uncertainty of Gibson going forward next year. He just hasn't stayed healthy.
Yeah, I was trying to discern the dog barks to see if there are any barks that were leaning on one side or another. But I think the dog thinks it's pretty even too.
Yeah, I believe so. Minnie and Mila are
haven't had it. I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Last question here, Will. Again, we're in the world of redraft, PPR. This is a big one. Alvin Kamara, Stephon Diggs, or Nick Chubb and Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, at first glance, I think it's pretty close. As I kind of think through it, though, I think it's the Kamara Diggs side, especially in PPR. Chubb's obviously in a better offense than Kamara, but I think the volume's just too high, especially with the targets in the PPR of Kamara, that I think you have to go him over Chubb. And I think that gap, especially with Hunt coming back at some point, and then clearly some weeks, it might be more important to have Diggs. Tyreek obviously will bounce back toward Travis Kelce a little bit, whereas I think there's not many games where Diggs isn't the guy and isn't scoring. I think it's, after looking at it for a minute, fairly easy.
Yeah, I think so too. And part of it comes down to Nick Chubb. As I've had Chubb on, in our work league all year, and he's been good, but he's had some disappointing games. This past week he was 16 for 61. In our half point scoring, he got 7 points. Week 4, he only got 11 points. Week 3, he got 8. And that's just not great. I mean, he's had some good weeks in there. He had, a couple 20-point games in there, but, it's 50-50 whether you're getting, a really, really good running back one kind of a week, or you're getting an average kind of week. And you don't like that out of a guy like Nick Chubb, where Kamara's not giving you, like, Kamara's had some iffy games, but not as many. And he's had more kind of boom games to him. So, yeah, I'll take the Kamara side pretty easily as well. That, the Diggs and Tyreek part, it's closer to a wash. They're both really the focal point. Diggs doesn't have Travis Kelce to deal with, but Tyreek just seems like the better guy. I don't know. And I think part of it comes out to the start that Diggs had, where people are a little bit disappointed, and that's still weighing on people. But he's been good. Just as consistent as Tyreek. He probably doesn't have the monster upside that we've seen from Tyreek with his, 200-yard, 3-touchdown kind of games. But he's still good. So, yeah, I will stick with Kamara and Diggs as well.
All right. That about wraps us up here for today. Good luck, everyone. In hopefully you're listening to this. Your waivers are already run, and your waivers and your Week 9 matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. Tune in next week for another waiver and start sit show. Until then, trust your board.